Good afternoon. This is the Ulster Gale again, and this will be the first proper podcast on the channel. This will be my review of the 2023 McKenna Cup. Firstly, I'd just like to say a massive congratulations to the Derry Senior Inter-County panel for their victory of the McKenna Cup. We'll get into more detail on their performance and bits and pieces in relation to the game later on, but very big, very impressive performance against Tyrone in the final. Fully deserved their win on the night, and definitely very impressive. And they've been building nicely throughout the McKenna Cup as we went along. A lot of counties off the back of their 2022 season coming into this season have maybe approached the McKenna Cup in different ways. For example, you've got Tyrone coming in off a very disappointing 2022 season, relinquishing their All-Ireland and Ulster titles. So they're probably coming in with a bit of a point to prove. You've got your Donegals and your Monaghan's that maybe are in a little bit of transition at the minute. So they're probably approaching it in a different way, maybe trying to find a lot of new players, and we'll look at Donegal in particular, have tried a lot of players. We have Down coming in with a very sort of average enough 2022. They've come in and they've kind of hit the ground running with this. We'll look at that in a bit more detail as well. We have Cavan that maybe felt that they possibly left the Tailteann Cup final behind them last year. Maybe have a point to prove there as well. You have Derry and Armagh coming in off very impressive 2022 seasons and want to keep that going. You have Derry winning their first Ulster title in a long period of time. So they'll probably want to, strike when the iron's hot there and try and really push on this season. You have Armagh again that had some very big victories last year. Seem to be coming to the fore and bubbling nicely as well. And then you have your Fermanagh and your Antrims, maybe traditionally seen as the weaker counties in Ulster. They, again, but at various times have had their moments and their days in the sun as well. And we'll look a little bit closer on how they've approached this McKenna Cup, what their form's like, and roughly we'll look at all teams and sort of how the McKenna Cup will possibly feed into their league campaign and possibly further down the line. I do appreciate that this is McKenna Cup, and a lot of the views, a lot of the comments that I will make today on this podcast will probably change and probably should change in the coming weeks. But off the back of the evidence that I've seen so far, this is what I am thinking. So the first county up is Antrim. So Antrim's first match in the McKenna Cup was against the Division 1 Armagh. And you can probably tell, or anyone watching the game could probably tell that it was a Division 1 team against a Division 3 team. Armagh kind of outclassed them. They were faster, more mobile, sharper to the ball. They got to the pitch of the game quicker. And probably Antrim's heads maybe dropped a little bit. It's not I don't think that match was probably not a very fair representation of Antrim off this panel and what I think Antrim could be capable of this season. So I'll probably bypass this game a little bit and move on to their second game in the McKenna Cup and focus on what I've seen in their match against Cavan. So again, Cavan, Division 3 team like Antrim. This is probably the level that they're aiming for. I thought they competed very well against Antrim. They got to the pitch of the game quicker. They dominated probably the fundamentals of the game. And what I mean by fundamentals is they won a lot of primary ball. Their transition from the defensive third to the middle third was actually quite good. To compete against the top, the sort of more dominant teams in the country, possibly was maybe a bit slow comparatively speaking to where maybe Antrim might want to be. But generally, their sharpness on the ball, their ability to retain possession, their ability to win possession was actually quite good against Cavan. Where I think maybe they fell down a little bit was getting to the pitch of the game. And now what I mean by the pitch of the game is, that transition into the attacking third, the cutting edge in the attacking third, and sort of getting to grips with the conditions, getting to grips with the microclimate of the ground. So there was quite a strong wind blowing that day across the pitch from where the flags were in Portlaoise across into the bottom corner of the goals where they were shooting in the first half. Now I felt it kind of took Antrim a while to get used to that. They kicked an awful lot of wides in that first half. They kicked 9 wides in the first half, 5 in the first 15 minutes. So the majority of their wides came in the first 15 minutes. So I wouldn't lay this on the grounds of the players. From working with panels, from working with squads in the past and playing in squads in the past, I would lay that as much at the feet of the backroom team as much as the players on the pitch, because usually what you would expect is, particularly with Antrim being at home in this game, you'd expect maybe the backroom team to be down on the pitch, gauge what way the prevailing wind is, what's the best way to kick into those goals, and then base your warm-up on the game around that. So get your players out on the pitch early, shoot into the goal, get them used to, right, we need to be on the right hand side of the post kicking or aiming to the right hand post so that the wind will draw it back in. I kind of felt that the Antrim team maybe just looked a bit underbaked in that sense, and it took them quite a while to get used to the pitch of the game. And I definitely think it took them too long to get to grips with the conditions in the first half. So in the first 20 minutes, they dominated the ball, they dominated possessions, they had the fundamentals of the game that you need to push on, and it's just there's that little bit of savviness, shot selection, where to take the shots on the pitch, where to aim your shots on the pitch, just kind of let them down a little bit. Now obviously it's McKenna Cup football, the conditions are tough in the McKenna Cup and in January. So imagine that that shot selection, that ability to take your shots, the ability to take the right shot on, will get better. I think Cavan, there's a lot more players in that Cavan panel that have played at a higher level. They've played against savvier teams, so therefore they've developed that. So I'd say the Cavan team and that Cavan panel probably a little further down the road than Antrim in that regard. And I thought Cavan were very, their shot selection, their savviness was a lot better in that first half. They only kicked, I think it was 3 wides in the first half. Now Antrim had a bit of poor luck as well, in the sense that the first goal they conceded to Cavan was maybe there was a slice of luck there. The defender maybe switched off for a fraction of a second, maybe got caught ball watching a fraction of a second, just got caught the wrong side of the Cavan forward, and the goal went in, which put Antrim on the back foot. If that goal hadn't went in, Antrim probably would have been closer to Cavan, or maybe even in front of Cavan. So there's definitely a lot of positives. Very young Antrim squad, a lot of positives from that panel, and they will get better as the year goes on. They will get better if they can keep that panel of players together. And obviously a few weeks down the road into the National League, they have a new manager, probably new backroom team. So they're probably still trying to get the grips with the messages that Andy McEntee's trying to get across to them, the way that Andy wants to get them to play football. So I would be expecting a lot more from this Antrim team. I'll expect them to improve a lot. It's a bit early in the season. It's probably a bit unfair to be overly critical of them. I think there's a great nucleus of players in that squad, a great nucleus of young players in that squad. Some of the players that I noticed in the Antrim team that impressed me was Pat Shivers in full forward line. Showed for the ball very well, was able to win his primary ball when kicked into him very well. Again, there was a few of his shots kind of went a bit awry, particularly in that first 15 minutes. Again, wouldn't be overly critical of him in that sense. There was a conditions that day were probably quite difficult. So there's more positives with that, his performance, and he definitely stood out for me. And I think could be quite a nuisance in Division 3 going forward this year. Teams probably will be targeting him as the main outlet for scores this year for Antrim. Another player that impressed me was Patrick McBride in the cornerback position. He was roving up the field quite well. He helped with link up the transition between defence, midfield and attack quite well, and he popped up in forward positions a few times as well. So again, was quite impressed by Pat from cornerback. And a third player that sort of shone out for me, particularly in the Cavan game, was Mark Jordan, playing at right half forward. Again, his mobility, he's got quite a bit of mobility about him. He's got quite a good stature about him in midfield to help win ball around the middle of the park. Was very good in helping with the transition between front to back. And again, could be is a bit of a scoring threat there with the lad as well. So overall, a great young squad. Maybe a little bit green, maybe a bit early in their development at the moment, particularly with the new management structure in there. Probably will take them a little while to get used to and get to grips with the new management style. But again, with players in and around against squads and teams in and around their level, I will expect this Antrim team to be competitive. I do think there are teams in Division 3 that are probably a little bit further down the road in their development, so I think Division 3 will be a bit of a challenge for them. And I think they'll need to probably have a few upsets, because they're also in a division with a strong Cavan team, strong Down team. Fermanagh, as we'll get onto in a little bit again, look quite sharp as well. So I think it could be a bit of a tough year for Antrim, but there's definitely enough on that panel for them to secure their Division 3 status. And maybe make a little bit of an imprint on the McKenna Cup as well later in the year. Now, moving on to Armagh. Over the course of the games this year, Kieran McGeeney did use quite a lot of players. Now, they won very well against Antrim, but you can clearly see it was a difference. There was a massive difference in the conditioning of the players. You could tell that Armagh were playing Division 2, Division 1 football over the last 5 years. Players just looked that little bit more savvy, a little bit more sharper on the ball, a bit crisper in possession, and they were able to transition that bit quicker, well actually a good bit quicker than the Antrim players. So you can tell that they're a little bit further down the road in their development, and the quality of their players shone through a bit more in that game. Now, they did lose to Cavan. They were very competitive in the first half in that game, and I think they were leading for a good chunk of that game. But there was a lot of changes to the starting team. There was a lot of change. They pretty much changed the entire team at half time, which again affected the flow, affected the fluency of the team, which probably maybe worked against them against Cavan. Cavan kept it a bit more solid, and a little bit more, there was a bit more fluency because of there was a lot less changes on the panel. So again, I will expect Armagh to have a good shake at Division 1 because their players look to be up and at it early. They look to be in good shape. They seem to have a good transition in their game. Some of the players that I will be looking out for, Jarlath O'Byrne again played very well. In the time that he had on the pitch. Ian Nugent again looks very solid. Again, and Rory Grugan again, one of their big scoring threats this year. Should be again a very key influential player for Armagh. Again, I will expect them probably to hit the ground running quite early in Division 1, because they just look to be at the pitch of football a bit quicker. Maybe some of the other Division 1 teams that I've spotted in the McKenna Cup and other, just that little bit of lack of fluency due to the sheer volume of changes that they were making in the games, maybe worked against them a little bit. Kieran McGeeney always has these teams well prepared. You think back through the history of his managerial career and his playing career, he gets the people around him, gets the people working under him and with him up and at it early in the season. So again, I expect that their ability to win ball, win primary possession around the middle of the field. I also expect that some of their sharp forwards, I think they'll hit the ground quite well, or hit the ground running quite well in the National League. So I would be quite hopeful if I was an Armagh fan off the back of what I've seen so far this year. And we'll have to just wait and see. Now, I would think possibly like one of the big issues that Armagh kind of had last year, to my opinion, was their starting 15 was as good as most teams at that sort of secondary top tier. So obviously you have your top tier teams, your Mayos, your Kerrys, your Galways, your Mayos from last year, and then you have like your little tier of teams below that are still in the top teams of the country, but maybe just that wee bit behind in development, and some of the top teams competing for All Irelands. So like your Derrys, your Tyrones, Armagh's in there as well. You could probably put Donegal and Monaghan in there too. You could even maybe put in Roscommon. Mayo probably were, because they were in transition last year, probably in that category as well. So Kildare's as well. So they're Division 1, Division 2, can beat Division top tier teams on their day. So comparatively speaking, one of the big faults with I think a lot of these panels is your starting 15s is competitive with all these big teams. But when you start to scratch the surface in the squad a little bit and the players coming off the bench in the second half, the quality of your team kind of drops a little bit. Now that's my personal opinion. I'm sure there's a lot of Armagh fans out there and other Ulster GA fans that'll possibly disagree with me there. But that's my opinion from what I've seen. Now, in saying that, Armagh is probably one of the teams that I maybe watched a little less over the course of the McKenna Cup. There's probably a lot of young, fresh players there that I maybe probably should have noticed that I haven't noticed so far. But because Armagh are playing in Division 1, I reckon there'll be a lot of exposure, or a lot more exposure of Armagh on the sort of traditional media, your RTEs, your Teenage E's and stuff. So they should probably be, I probably should get an opportunity to watch them a lot more in the early rounds of the league. So I'd say probably with my first National League roundup after the first two set of matches, I would say, my outlook and my perspectives of Armagh will probably change quite a bit over the first couple of rounds of the league. Again, historically, teams that have looked and showed a bit of promise in the McKenna Cup, sometimes maybe don't translate that into the early rounds of the league. Now, I hope that's not the case with this Armagh team, because I love seeing Ulster teams do well. So hopefully they can hit the ground running, get a good start to the National League, and that strong nucleus of players that broke through in the last couple of years should make that difference and should make the early running. I expect that Kerry maybe possibly could have a slow start to the league this year, because being in the All-Ireland final last year with the Clifford brothers playing club football late, they maybe might have a slow start. Obviously Mayo will be coming back and trying to come back strong this year. There'll be a bit of new manager bounce, but at the same time, Kevin McStay still might need a bit of time to get their ideas across. So Galway again, All Ireland finalists last year. There could be a few issues there. There could be a bit of hangover from the All Ireland final from the year before. Again, you have your Tyrone. We'll get on to them. Donegal, Mayo, or Monaghan, sorry. There'll be a big is basically a mini Ulster Championship in the National League this year, which I think will be very beneficial. No, not a lot of travel, no grounds that a lot of the Ulster teams are familiar on. It'll also be very dog eat dog as well, because like Ulster teams, they're never pretty to each other when they play. So again, I'm expecting a good, sharp, crisp year. I'm hoping there's possibly an Ulster title in that Armagh team as well. So let's see how they get on. Next on my list is the McKenna Cup champions. Okay, so Derry have impressed me over the course of this McKenna Cup. As you can see there in my points, they used a consistent 23, 22, 23, 24, 25 players throughout the majority of the league. They got a very, they've built a lot of very strong momentum, getting to the final. They've played some good teams along the way. They played a very spiky Fermanagh team, and a Fermanagh team that really tested them in that game as well, which I'll discuss a little bit more when we get on to Fermanagh. Fermanagh really put it up to them in that game, really challenged them for a good 40-50 minutes of that game, and they really came to the fore and they really pushed on. Again, had a bit of a slow start against Tyrone in the second league game. Maybe struggled a bit with McShane and Dar Canavan in that match a little bit. But again, a fantastic comeback against that Tyrone team. They really, when they got that purple patch, they really, that's the one thing that impressed me about this Derry team. When they get a purple patch, they really put it on the scoreboard. So particularly Shane McGuigan, they've got a real tack sharp forward there that will really punish teams when he gets on. From the free, from kicking frees to general play, he really will, force them to. He will really punish you whenever Derry get on top. They were they were very strong around the middle third, and you have to factor in you've got Bradley and Glass to come back from the Glen boys, which will only make them stronger in midfield. So I think they will really challenge a lot of teams this year. They will challenge a lot of teams, and a lot of teams will look at that Derry panel and go, "Oh, I really don't want to play." No, they will be that nuisance team this year, I think. If they can keep injury free, and they can keep all their players sharp and get a good run, and they time their run through the championship in particular very well, and don't peak too early, I would really expect another good season from this Derry team. The one worry I would have, again, as I've just mentioned it there, is could there be a wee element of burnout? Could there be maybe a wee element of maybe peaking early? Because if the Glen lads have pretty much played football for an entire year at this stage. Will they get much of a break? How quickly will they filter back into that Derry team? They've hit the ground running similar to Armagh. They looked very sharp, and they looked very strong in all the games that they've played. They've built quite well throughout. Their performances have been progressively getting better throughout the McKenna Cup. I do believe that the Derry Down game in the semi-final was the game of the tournament. The pace of that match for McKenna Cup football was astounding from both teams. It was an absolute credit to both teams. A real dogged fight in the middle of the park. Some fantastic scores. Some of the goals from Down in that game were brilliant. Some of the points from Down and Derry in that game were brilliant as well. A real swung from end to end. Maybe a bit of an anticlimax at finishing at a penalty shootout, but it is that time of year. You don't want to overload these players, particularly in this stage of their development and their fitness. Nobody wants to be playing extra time in a cold, wet, damp pitch. It just increases that risk of soft muscle injuries. So it's and again in the final they dominated the final. I know Tyrone had that little purple patch at the start of the second half. I put that down to maybe some of the subs that they brought on. They brought on Conor Myler, they brought on Petey Hart just before half time. So there was Richie Donnelly was struggling in that game. He got hooked and they kind of, but they did play. Generally, they bossed that match, and they really made a Tyrone team look a little bit off the pace and a little bit soft. I'll get on to Tyrone a little bit later as well. But that first half, like, Tyrone really did not have any cutting edge against that Derry backline. They limited some very high-profile players for Tyrone. Kieran McGeary got on a lot of ball, but had a relatively quiet game. Matty Donnelly, again, got on quite a bit of ball, but had a very quiet game. And I know Darren McCurry, it was his first appearance in the McKenna Cup, but again, outside of his goal, was basically non-existent in that game. Didn't really influence the game. It was only when Cathal McShane come on at the start of the second half that they really had any cutting edge. And then Derry actually quite quickly got the grips with Cathal McShane. By 15-20 minutes into the second half, they pretty much had him nullified. And they were able to, their transition on the break was frightening. The Derry transition on the break was extremely good. Their ability to hit good, well worked ball into the full forward line was very sharp as well. Now, the one thing I would say about Derry is I do think they're going to be up against it. They will be up against it in Division 2. I think I would still put them favourites to be in the top 2 at the end of the league. I do think it's going to be tough because we all expect Dublin to win that group and win it probably quite well. Kildare again have a very strong nucleus to the team there as well. They'll be well in that fight. They're very strong around the middle of the field as well. So Derry's midfielders will need to be on. They'll need to be on point that day. So I think that'll be the big game. That'll be the big game in Division 2, in my opinion. I think it'll boil down between Kildare and Derry for the number 2 spot. Don't forget, you also have Meath in that Division 2. On their day, can really put it up to any team at that level. So again, it won't be a stroll in the park getting out of Division 2 for this Derry team. But another match that I'm really looking forward to is Derry have Dublin in Owenbeg. So I'll be fascinated to see. Owenbeg's a tough place to go for any county team. Derry really do turn up when they play up on the Glen Shane. So I'll be intrigued to see how this Renaissance Dublin team. There's a lot of this, there's a GAA fan TV that I watch as well of a fella from Dublin. He, in his preview of Dublin this year, he's very hopeful that this will be a bit of a renaissance of Dublin football. They have a couple of their golden generation players back. So I'll be intrigued to see how they respond and how they react up in the hills of East Derry. Some of the players I noticed in this game, we've Anton Tohal. Again, played very, was very competitive. Was very mobile against Fermanagh. He also, influenced the game at times against Tyrone in the group game. So again, he needs he's a bit raw, a bit of a raw talent. But again, there's a lot of potential there. Doherty and Niall Loughlin, again impressed me at times during the McKenna Cup. Again, players that I think will have a very important role for Derry this season. And then the star of the show in the McKenna Cup. He's continued on from his form from last year, and I think he really will grow into one of the top forwards in Ireland this year. Is Shane McGuigan. Now again, when we get to particularly the latter parts of the league and into the championship, he's going to be a lot tighter marked. There's going to be a lot more cynicism around Shane McGuigan. There's going to be a lot more detailing on him. So we will see. But I do think this guy is the real deal. I think generally the second season really tells whether these players are going to be top forwards in Ireland. And I think, and what I've seen so far from this lad is he's just picked up from where he was last year, and he's running with it. Very impressed in the McKenna Cup final by him. Generally, he's always guaranteeing you 4 or 5 points every game. Very reliable free taker, and I think he will definitely make a big stamp on this year's league and championship. Now, Donegal. Where do we start with Donegal? It's probably quite hard to get a true reflection on Donegal this season. Again, a lot of new players. A lot of they've had a few. I listened to when I was watching the Monaghan Donegal game and second group game. Mark McHugh was the co-commentator on it on the Ulster fan or the Ulster GAA TV. And fair play to the Ulster GAA TV. They did a fantastic job with all the highlights and exposure for the McKenna Cup. They did a brilliant job. And all the people involved with that. The more exposure we get to GAA, the better. But he was mentioning, back to the original point, Mark basically was saying that there was a lot of injuries, a lot of people dropping out of the panel early. They've lost a couple of players early. There's still a bit of debate over whether some of these sort of more established senior names from last season and the last couple of seasons are going to commit. This is the first time in quite a while that Donegal are going into a new season without the great Michael Murphy. I have a video lined up for my appreciation of the superstar and all-time great player that Michael Murphy was. He was a stalwart of that Donegal team. He always showed up in every game, even when he was carrying injuries and he wasn't quite, when he was trying to be managed through seasons, he was still such an influential player. He was so reliable from the free spot. You could pull him out around the middle and he would win ball. You could leave him in the full forward line and he was just a menace. The partnership that him and Patrick McBrearty had for years was brilliant. And before that, McFadden as well, playing off him. Definitely one of the all-time greats, not only of Donegal football, but of Ulster football and Irish football nationally. So it's going to be a tough season without the glorious leader of Michael Murphy in and around that panel. But off the back of that, Donegal used a lot of new players into this panel. So it's probably quite hard to judge what shape this Donegal panel is going to have going into the National League and then further on down the road into the Championship. Now, they lost quite well to Down in their first game, but as we'll see later on, and I think it's the next slide when we get on to Down. Down were up and at it. They were sharp. They had a fairly strong team. They were quite consistent in the players that they used. So Down have hit the ground running this season. I think they really are aiming to get out of Division 3 to try and give themselves the best possible chance of playing senior football rather than Tailteann Cup football this year. So I think the mixture of Donegal experimenting, there's a new management structure in there as well. So excuse me, and again, Mark McHugh also mentioned that the management team maybe is looking to know what players that were about the county and see what is there anything else out there that they can bring into the panel, and as you'll see now in a little bit, they were quite good, and there are some very good prospects coming through in that Donegal team. I think they might be a little bit green possibly to really make a statement this year in both National League and Championship. But there's definitely still a bright future in Donegal football. There are very much a team in transition at the minute. And Donegal will still be a threat to any team on any given day. particularly in Ballybofey. Now I know they lost to Monaghan in their second McKenna Cup game, but Monaghan were a lot stronger on the night. You know, they had a lot more of their established names on the pitch. So no, there wasn't that many nailed on players that you would say, yeah, they're definitely going to be starting for Donegal in the summer. No, Jamie Brennan was there, McMenamin was there, there might have been a couple of others, but generally it was a very new, green-looking Donegal squad, and I thought that they acquitted themselves. No, they went out of the game for large parts. You know, maybe that's a team that hasn't really played together that often. So that cohesion, that relationship between the players, that cohesion maybe wasn't quite there. So that would probably explain why they did go out of the games both against Down and Monaghan for large parts. But when they got it going and when they got to the pitch of the game and got some of the fundamentals of the game, they did look quite well. Young Walsh basically, took his goal well. So there's definitely a lot of positives for Donegal in this McKenna Cup. Now I do think they're going to have a tough league. One concern I had was against Monaghan was the form of Jamie Brennan. Was missing frees that you normally would hang your hat on him to kick over the bar. So I will caveat this: it's McKenna Cup football. We don't know the training load that these lads are under. They could have been training very heavy that week, and as you know, heavy pitch, and if you've heavy legs as well, it just makes life that little bit harder. So yes, he was maybe lacked a little bit of sharpness against Monaghan, particularly from the dead ball. But again, Jamie Brennan is a class act of a player, and I do expect him to be a very influential player in that panel this year. But again, very, very strong. No, actually, a very strong performance against Monaghan, even though they lost that match. I would actually be, I would have, like, if I was a Donegal fan, I'd have been happier coming out of Ballybofey that night than maybe a Monaghan fan. Because when you looked at the strength on paper of the two panels, the fact that Donegal got within a couple of points of that Monaghan team, I think is a real achievement. I would be concerned for the early rounds of the National League. I just think preparation-wise, I just think they're a little bit behind some of the other Division 1 teams. The fact that we didn't see any of the, or we didn't see a lot of the, the more established players in the McKenna Cup. How prepared are they? Obviously we don't know. We're not in the camp. They could be all flying fit. They could be all ready and raring to go, and they could come out. They could prove me completely wrong and make a complete spoon of me, and they could go out and blow everyone out of the water in the opening rounds of the league. But again, I can only go off the evidence that I've seen so far, and I just think possibly they might struggle in the early rounds of the league. But we'll wait and see. Some of the players that really impressed me, there's some very young talents there that really impressed me in the McKenna Cup, and I think if Donegal are to prove me wrong and do really well in the opening rounds of the league, I think these are the lads that are going to prove me wrong. JB Walsh had a fantastic game against Monaghan. Really stood up, really showed leadership. Really had a cutting edge to them in the game when he got on the ball. When Donegal had the fundamentals of the game, he really drove that home. O'Boyle, excuse my butchering of the pronunciation. Again against Down, got to the pitch of the game probably better than anyone on the Donegal team that night. Again, had a fairly solid game against Monaghan, from what I've seen. Again, against Monaghan, Luke McGlynn had a very, very strong game. Played very well, got on quite a bit of ball, did quite well, competed very well. And then a young man, a young man that's been talked about from anyone that I know from Donegal that I've spoken to. I didn't get to see an awful lot of him in the McKenna Cup because I didn't watch a lot of the Down game. I did watch the full Monaghan game, which I don't think he played an awful lot off if he did at all. But Jack McKelvey, I've heard a lot of very good things about this young man. So again, I think he'll be one to watch out for in this Donegal panel going forward. So Donegal have been great stalwarts of the Ulster game in the 2000s and particularly the 2010s. It'll be interesting to see how they do without their leader. They still have a lot of strong players in there, Jamie Brennan and Patrick McBrearty and so on. So they do have a lot of strong players in that panel to come back in there. It's whether they have that cohesion built up yet. That's the big question I have over Donegal. But we'll see. So next is Down. Again, had a very strong McKenna Cup. They played well in their 3 games. They look to be, they seem to have hit the ground well. Their conditioning looks good. Their sharpness looks good. Their transitions look good. Massive kudos to that management team coming in. You can really see a massive difference in the buy-in from the players just from watching the team. I'd say there's probably some buzz in training at the minute, looking at the way those players have attacked the games in the McKenna Cup. They have a very strong system of play. They look to be very well prepared. So to me, that's a very good reflection on the backroom team. They've got to the pitch of every game very quickly. They've dominated the fundamentals of a lot of these games. They've looked sharp up front. And again, like I said, whenever I did the Derry one, the Derry Down game to me was, that looked like a latter stages of the National League game. The game against Derry, the pace, the pressure, the full court presses, the battles around the middle of the field, some of the points and goals that were scored in that match were sensational for the time of year, and it was an absolute credit to both squads of players. Again, a bit disappointing. Down were very unlucky not to make that final. If I was to be brutally honest, I probably would have said they maybe were slightly the better team on the day. But again, you could easily argue that Derry were deserved their win. You can't really argue against that either. This was a game where the smallest of margins dictated the game, and I'd say probably the fact that Derry have been playing at just maybe the slightly higher level over the last sort of season or two probably told in the end. Again, nobody wants to lose, particularly a Gaelic match. Nobody wants to see it end or go out on a penalty shootout. It's not really the GAA way, so to speak. Plus the shape of the penalty spot after 3 penalties was, it was fair play to any man who stood up and took a penalty on that pitch that day, because again, January football, the state of pitches at this time of year, and the penalty spot really did cut up quite badly. So I would say that, like, going off the back of what I've seen so far, just the sheer level of conditioning, the sheer sharpness, the enthusiasm that I've seen in that Down team. It's the most enthusiastic I've seen a Down team play for a few seasons. So I would really have to, you can see there my players that I've noticed, I kind of cheated a little bit and put the management team in there at the bottom. I think a lot of credit has to go to the management team and the backroom staff. Whatever they're doing, whatever way they're getting these players' enthusiasm and confidence up, they're clearly doing a very good job. It's similar to Gallagher's role in Derry. Instantaneously, as soon as they come in, you could see the uptake in the enthusiasm, and I think Down will be a very dangerous team this season. Whether they play senior football, whether they play Tailteann Cup football, I think they are definitely, judging off what we've seen so far, and again, my views, similar to Donegal, similar to Armagh, could be very different come the end, my roundup of the first 2 weekends of the National League in a fortnight's time. I could be sitting very humbled here with a couple of my sort of takes on this. But again, like I said in the opening slide, I'm going off the back of what I've seen in the McKenna Cup. And Down were one of the teams that really impressed me. that hunger, that fight around the middle of the field, the transition, the sharpness was up there. And I think look to be up and at it early. And then, I predict them to have a good National League in Division 3. If they're not getting promoted, they're definitely going to be giving it a good shake, I think. Barring injuries, barring a bit of bad luck, I would be expecting them to be in the shake-up for Division 3 come later in the year. Players I noticed in the McKenna Cup, the sharpness of Heverin up front. A lot of incisiveness, a lot of sharpness on the ball. There's a young lad Francis as well. Noticed, he seemed to influence the game against Derry quite a bit. O'Hagan as well. Again, I'm expecting fairly decent things from this Down team this year. Again, could be proved wrong. It is very early in their development. It is very early on their, this new project under Lavery. It is very early. So I know they could be, for that reason, they could be maybe quite inconsistent this year. They could go out and be brilliant in one game and maybe flatter to deceive in the next game. I hope that's not the case, because my father was always a big fan of Down from the 60s and into the 90s as well. There's some great history, some great sleeping giant of Gaelic football in Ulster. They've had some fantastic squads, some fantastic teams over the years. We were always played a very languid, very stylish style of football. They were always good at getting goals. They were always a tough team to play against in the championship, and it's great to see hopefully them back on the rise again and competing. I want to see them back competing at the top and the highest level of inter-county football. So hopefully this year is the first step on that renaissance. Like Derry, like Armagh, and before that Monaghan and Donegal, fighting their way to the top table as well. The more teams we have from Ulster at that top table, the better, in my opinion. Looking forward to a strong season from Down this year. Again, I'd probably say, usually when you see teams that are on this sort of rebound road, like Armagh, show glimpses. Obviously last season was the most consistent season yet. Maintaining their Division 1 status and knocking Tyrone out of the championship, and they've had a few good games here and there. Even last year there was still a wee bit of inconsistency there with that Armagh team, and the previous seasons before that, the renaissance under Kieran McGuinness, it took them a little while. You could see glimpses, you could see sparks in them, and I think Down will be similar this season and possibly next season as well. You might see a little bit of inconsistency with this Down team. I'd love to see them burn through Division 3, get up and win the league final, get up, maintain their spot in Senior All-Ireland football. On the contrary to that, if they don't make senior football, if they don't make the Sam Maguire group stages this year, I would put them hot favourites for the Tailteann Cup this year. Just off the back of, again, I'm probably getting a little bit carried away here. I'm probably getting a little bit overexcited from what I've seen in a McKenna Cup. Obviously, I'll be able to make a bit more of a judgment on that come towards the end of the National League, but so far so good. So they're promising, I think, up along with Cavan. If Cavan don't make senior football this year as well, I think Cavan will be thereabouts in the Tailteann Cup. I think Fermanagh will give it a good stab this year as well if they don't make it up into senior football. So I think I would be quite hopeful if we have Ulster teams in the Tailteann Cup. I think we should have a good shout, and if Down miss out on senior football, I would definitely say they have a good opportunity of making a Tailteann Cup final if they commit to it. We're still to see, do we get the drop off and commitment like what happened to Tommy Murphy Cup the first year? Again, a lot of teams bought into it, and then by the second and third season, you had players going to America, you had players maybe not committing. Again, I think a lot of that will boil down to how the GAA treat it as well. Will they do what they did with the Tommy Murphy Cup and stick it on as a curtain raiser to a nothing quarter final in the All Ireland season series? So only time will tell. So that's my take on Down. Now, neatly on to Cavan. I was disappointed in their semi-final. One of the big things that Tyrone lacked last year, and even the year they won the All-Ireland, they kind of struggled a little bit around the middle of the park. This Cavan panel, this Cavan team traditionally would have been quite strong around the middle of the field. And they did challenge. When they got into the swing of the game against Antrim, they did dominate at times midfield against Antrim. So whenever they were going in against Tyrone, I was like, right, this Cavan team, let's see, can they land a glove on this Tyrone midfield and see, is there an All-Ireland potentially in this Tyrone team? And for whatever reason, they just didn't really compete against Tyrone at midfield. Now, there's one of two things that immediately jump into my head. Did the Cavan team maybe just not turn up on the night? Again, it is McKenna Cup football. Consistency is maybe not a massively expected thing in this time of the year. I'm expecting teams to be a little bit inconsistent, a bit hit and miss, a bit hot and cold. Is it that? Is the Tyrone midfield better than I thought, better than I give it credit for, and they didn't let Cavan test them in midfield? I'd say only time will tell further on down the road. They did very well against Antrim. Okay, so Cavan are a Division 3 team this year, so they're going to be going up against teams like Antrim, like Down. Probably one of the reasons I maybe would have preferred seeing Tyrone and Derry playing other in the semi-final and Cavan and Down playing in the other, because again that would have been two Division 1 teams against two Division 3 teams playing against each other. So it might have given us a wee bit more of an insight as to what to possibly expect in the National League. But it didn't happen that way. So they did play against Antrim. They, particularly in the first 25 minutes or so, it took them a little while to get to the grips of the game, to try and win, to try and get on top of the fundamentals of the game. So possession, midfield, and the like. They did create a lot of goal chances against Antrim, which is definitely a big positive for this Cavan team. They maybe got a little bit lucky with the first goal, but the second goal was a very well worked goal. Their patience on the ball, their decision making on the ball when they did get primary possessions, particularly in that first half, they were very savvy on the ball. They recycled it when they needed to recycle it, and then when they got that opening, they cut through Antrim with a bit of sharpness, with a bit of tenacity. So I think they might struggle if they get into senior football. They maybe might struggle against maybe some of the bigger teams, but ideally that's where Cavan want to be, a former sleeping giant of Ulster football. A lot of All-Irelands, a lot of Ulster titles to their name, and again, there's a huge tradition in Cavan football there. So let's see, can we get this Cavan team? I do think they're definitely worth their place in senior football, from what I've seen so far and what I've seen over the last couple of seasons. They probably should. They've got to a few quarterfinals. They've had a few good shakes at Ulster. They had an absolute titanic battle. I know it's very different teams, but they had a very titanic. They had a great battle with Tyrone in the 2016 championship, bringing them to a replay in the semi-final. So there's definitely a lot of strong players there. They definitely can. They got a big scalp against Armagh in their first game. Now, in saying that, Armagh did lose that bit of cohesion, that little bit of consistency in their selection. They made a lot of changes against Cavan, and you can tell that they lost that little bit of fluency in the game. Did that play a part? Cavan did play very well in that game. They were very sharp up front. Their transition in both games was pretty good. I would worry a little bit about their fundamentals. Can they win ball? Can they get on enough ball? Because for large parts of the Antrim game. They did struggle a little bit to win primary possession. And against Tyrone as well, they really struggled to win primary possession, and Tyrone really choked the life out of them in that game. So it'll be interesting to see. But if that Cavan team can get their hand on enough ball, I think they're a match for anyone in that Division 3 lower part of Division 2 bracket. They really are. They will be. They will be a team to be reckoned with. At that level, I expect them to be in the shake-up for promotion out of Division 3. If they do miss out on senior football with this new system and format for the All-Ireland series, again, like Down, like Fermanagh, I'll expect them to be in the shake-up for the Tailteann Cup. So we'll have to wait and see how the season progresses for them. I think it'll be very important they hit the ground running quite early in the National League. Probably with the Cavan realistically should be playing at least Division 2 football. They have played Division. They've been consistently Division 2. I think they even dipped up into Division 1 at a time in the last 5-10 years. So there's definitely the talent there. There's definitely the drive for Cavan football to get back to that top table again. Some of the players that I noticed, Boylan, Brady, again had good McKenna Cups, got on a lot of ball, were quite savvy. Darren McVitie, again, one of their more established names, but again was very solid at times during this. And their star of the show was Oisin Kiernan, a real sharp footballer. He seems to be up and at it early. Carried that team at times, and some of the matches as well. It's hard to know what to make of this Cavan panel at the minute. Again, it's McKenna Cup football. What can you really take from McKenna Cup football? I know I was getting quite excited about Down there a minute ago, but we'll wait and see. Getting to a McKenna Cup semi-final, they've 3 matches. They've 3 matches under their belt. 3 fairly tough matches, and they played two matches against Division 1 teams. And then they played their 3rd match against a Division 3 team. They won their Division 3 game. They beat one of the Division 1 teams. And they didn't, even though they struggled to win a little bit of primary ball, they didn't look completely out of place against Tyrone as well. So I definitely would be hopeful for this Cavan team as well. I do think the standard of football in this McKenna Cup across the board was strong. Again, I will caveat it, it's McKenna Cup football. We won't know the greater picture until we get at least halfway through the league anyway. And again, even National League and Championship, there can be a massive change in fortunes. We've seen Donegal, we've seen Tyrone struggling in the McKenna Cup and the National League, and they get to the latter stages of the Championship. So a lot of my excitement, a lot of my giddiness could be very misplaced at this stage of the year. But I love the McKenna Cup. I love this competition. I love getting more of an opportunity to watch some of these teams that maybe the traditional media don't give us enough exposure to. Next team on our list is Fermanagh. Now, this is one of the teams that really impressed me. Particularly some of the players in this. We had Shay Cullen back after a bit of time out from the county panel. I think he was travelling for a while, possibly was it Australia. He came back and had a very solid one. They battled very well against Tyrone for at least 45 minutes. And Tyrone's power off the bench just Fermanagh couldn't match it. The legs kind of went a little bit, which is expected around this time of year. It's tough to keep that intensity going, particularly when you're playing Division 3 football against a Division 1 team. The level of conditioning, and then when you're going up against one of the top tier teams in Ireland, it's a tough ask for Fermanagh at this stage of the year to compete with a Tyrone team with the resources that they have, and the talent and the depth and on the bench that these lads would have as well. I actually felt they definitely played very well. They competed. they got their hands on a lot of ball against Tyrone. The one thing I would say in both games is their shot selection, getting to the pitch of the game, getting to the pitch of the conditions. They maybe weren't took them. Put it this way: if they had took half their wides against Derry, they would have been very, very close to winning that game. And they would have been a lot closer to Tyrone as well if they had took some of the wides that they kicked when they were on top against Tyrone. So they definitely asked questions of a Division 1 Tyrone team. They asked questions of a Division 2 Derry team, which have ambitions of getting to Division 1 and are current reigning Ulster champions. So I think a lot of people will probably, Fermanagh will probably go in under the radar a little bit going into the National League, but I think a lot of them teams in Division 3 could get a rude awakening against that Fermanagh team. I think they should be very competitive in Division 3, and if they're in the Tailteann Cup, I think they'll definitely ruffle a few feathers around the country this year, I think, because there's definitely a few bright sparks in that panel, and if they can keep that panel together, which I know Fermanagh at times have had difficulty with in the past, if they can keep that panel together, and they can get the buy-in, particularly if they drop down into the Tailteann Cup later on in the year, I do think they will be a match for a lot of teams this year. So one thing I would maybe say is, you can see my point there, I think they may be short an additional scorer. There was a lot of unconverted chances against Derry. A lot of snatched shots. Again, I will caveat that it is McKenna Cup. It is early in the season. I do think a lot of them chances that was missed against Derry, I think later on in the year those chances would be converted. So maybe I'm being a little bit harsh on them. But I was quite impressed with the sharpness. They did fade a little bit in the games, but again, fitness will come. If you're just worrying about legs, that will come later on in the year when there's a bit more training under their belt, a bit more matches under their belt. That will come. I would be more worried if you had loads of legs, and loads of fitness, but your patterns of play and you weren't winning enough fundamentals of the game. That will be more of a worry for me. Again, some of the players, some very good bright sparks in this one. I mentioned them earlier on. Shea Cullen, Alton Kelm, again, really impressed me. Jones and Breen as well looked very lively and very bright at times during the McKenna Cup. So again, a solid team. Again, they should get a good run in Division 3. Should get a good run in Division 3. Again, Fermanagh always have had that. Fermanagh have always had that plucky underdog, can really put it up to teams like the Great Dublin team. Like there was a couple of seasons ago in the championship. Was it even the Super 8s or the qualifiers or something? They played that Great Dublin team, and they really made it tough. They really made it difficult for that Dublin team. Again, there's a lot of talent in Fermanagh that maybe isn't in that county team that maybe should be. Again, I don't know enough about the internal politics of Fermanagh football to really comment on that. But again, I think they're everyone's second team in Ulster. Everyone would love to see Fermanagh win an Ulster title. I remember sitting in the stands in 2004 when they beat Armagh to get to an Ulster semi-final, and it was great to see. It was an absolute carnival atmosphere against Mayo in the semi-final. I think everyone outside of Mayo was supporting Fermanagh that day, and Mayo are a well-loved team in county football. Everyone wants to see Mayo get over the line as well. So it says something about how how highly Fermanagh are thought of around the world. Now, some of it may be a little bit condescending, but at the same time, it'd be great. I'd love to see Fermanagh do well. I'd love to see them get out of Division 3, cement back into senior football. But if they don't make senior football this year, I would definitely think they would have a good shot at a good run in the Tailteann Cup. I do think there's something about this Fermanagh team, and if they get a run, they get a bit of momentum, they get a little bit of luck with draws and the like, could definitely ruffle a few feathers this year in the championship. Again, there's a lot of football to be played between now and then, which I have mentioned a couple of times and do admit. I'd love to see them do well in the National League. I'd love to see them do well in the Tailteann Cup or the Senior Championship, whatever it is that they're competing in. And I look forward to getting a chance to watch Fermanagh a little bit this year. Hopefully the traditional GAA media, do give the Division 3 and the Division 4 teams a fair crack at a bit of publicity this year, and show them in the Tailteann Cup, in the National League and stuff as well. I wouldn't be overly hopeful of that, but let's hope. I can live in hope. Monaghan, now let's start with Monaghan, is a bit of a strange one. A lot of the individual performances from Monaghan definitely impressed me. Some of their play impressed me, but at the same time, I don't know. I just think they may potentially struggle a little bit in Division 1. They lost to a very sharp Down team, which again, Donegal lost to that Down team as well. That Down team were up and at it, and I do like, as I've said before, I do like where this Down team is going. I think this is a Monaghan team very much in transition. There's definitely one or two strong players to come back in. Kieran Hughes has to come back into that panel. The goalkeeper didn't play the entirety of it. Rory Began didn't play. Kieran McManus has to come back in. So that Monaghan team will get a lot stronger as the year goes on, and come championship time, that Monaghan team will not be an easy team to play against. They are a team in transition. They have found some fantastic young players. I do think they might, along with Donegal, I think they may struggle a little bit, particularly in the early stages of the National League, depending on how sharp and how to the pitch of games some of the other teams are. I think they could struggle. I think the likes of Mayo will probably be up and at it early in the league this year. I would expect Tyrone. I'd be hoping Tyrone could start the league kind of fairly well this year. They have a lot of points to prove this year. Armagh will be up and at. We've seen that their conditioning. They're up and at it as well. Donegal will be fighting for survival as well. So, like I said in one of my previous videos, I do think one or possibly two of Tyrone, Armagh, Donegal and Monaghan may go down this year. I do think the strength of Tyrone's squad should keep them in Division 1. I think Donegal are at big risk of potential, particularly if they don't start the National League well. I think if Monaghan don't start the National League well too, could be in trouble. Galway are on a high from getting to the All-Ireland final. Now there could be a bit of a hangover there. That Kerry team, a Kerry team arrogant, a Kerry team confident, are always going to be a tough Kerry team to play. They have that confidence. They pretty much won everything in Gaelic football last year, particularly the Clifford brothers. So there's going to be, they may have a slow start, but I'm not sure when Monaghan get Kerry. If you want to get Kerry this year, you want to get them at home and you want to get them early. So I think Monaghan, if they don't get a bit of luck in the early rounds of the league, could struggle with their Division 1 status. They always seem to prove me and everyone else wrong. I thought Monaghan were nailed on to go down this last couple of seasons, but they always seem to pull some sort of a Houdini act. They beat Dublin last year. They're always a tough team. No matter, even if they have injuries, whether they're maybe not in good form, they're always a horrible team to play in the Ulster Championship. So I don't think I don't think it's doom and gloom for Monaghan by any stretch of the imagination. I do think an Ulster title is a realistic target for them this year. I think competing on a national stage maybe might be a little bit of a step for them. Might be a little bit of a step too far for them this season. I wouldn't be surprised if they've got previous of maintaining their Division 1 status against all the odds. I do think they'll be to the lower half of the National League. I don't think they're going to be in the shake-up for getting to a league final or winning it. I think if they get mid-table in the Division 1 and have a good shake at the Ulster title this year, I think it'll be a great season for them. And again, if they can establish some of these young players that they've found in the McKenna Cup, I think that'll be a big win for Monaghan this year, and then build towards next year again. And they very much a team in transition, new management team as well. Some of the players that I noticed, players to watch this season, there's a young man, S. Jones. He played well, particularly against Donegal. O'Hanlon and Michael Bannigan were stars of the show. Michael Bannigan really showed leadership against Donegal in that game. And there's a young man, Jay Irwin, as well, played well in patches as well for Monaghan, particularly against Donegal. The one thing that would have worried me coming off the back of that Donegal team was they were playing a much changed Donegal team. The cohesion wasn't quite there against Donegal. For Donegal, sorry. They had a much stronger team on the pitch. They had a lot more. They had a lot more of the team that will be playing in the summer, and they just fell over the line against that Donegal team. Again, McKenna Cup. We don't know the conditioning level of these players. They could have been using these matches as fitness training, basically. So again, my worries could be unfounded. I just felt they struggled to nail down the fundamentals of the game. When they did get the fundamentals of the game, when they did get the primary possession and held on to the possession, they did look dangerous and they did look sharp at times. But it would worry me the fact that they did go out of games quite sizably. Again, that could be just down to conditioning, it just could be down to the time of the year. But if that continues on into the National League, then it could become an area for this Monaghan team to worry about. It's not something to worry, like for all of these teams, like Cavan drifted in and out of games as well, Tyrone did it massively too. It's not the time of year to become concerned about these, but if that continues on into the National League and into particularly the latter stages of the National League, then that could become something to worry about. It's definitely something to monitor with these teams. So we'll see. I do think this Monaghan team will get a lot stronger, particularly towards the end of the league. The question will be is how many points will they gather in the early part of the league? If they manage to pick up maybe 2 or 3 points in the first 4 games of the National League, I would definitely put them to stay up. If they lose their first 4 league games, I think by the time they get those senior players integrated back in and get up and running towards the latter parts of the league, they could be in a bit of a relegation dogfight. So that's one of the reasons why I think them and Donegal maybe might struggle in Division 1. I do think you will know a lot more after the first 2 league games. If they lose, If the performances aren't there and they lose in the first two league games, I would be concerned. If they lose, say they lost the first, them and Donegal both, if they lost their first two league games, but the performances were there and they just were maybe a bit unlucky, then maybe they will get stronger as the league goes on. The question would be, is a lot of other teams will get stronger. You're going to have a hungry Roscommon team there that's going to be fighting for survival. You have a in transition Mayo team that always seem to get going towards the end of the league. Kerry will be going well towards the end of the league. You'll imagine Tyrone always start the league slowly, but always come strong in the latter rounds. So, could it be too little, too late? Possibly. I don't know. Time will tell. I'm only postulating at this stage, but we will have to wait and see. Next, now the enigmas of Ulster football. Tyrone, on paper, should have won this McKenna Cup at an absolute canter. Definitely, probably had the strongest panel and the closest panel and playing teams and playing staff to what will be playing for Tyrone in the summer. Now, the fact that they, excuse my French, but the arse fell out of them against Derry in the group game, and then they got completely dominated against Derry in the final. Fermanagh caused them problems for 40 minutes as well. It's not a worry yet, because again, how much conditioning do these players have? So if you've a group of players, no matter how good they are, if they're not conditioned, they're going to be inconsistent. They're going to drift in and out of games. But with Tyrone historically always having slow starts to the league, even when they play well in the McKenna Cup, that would worry me a little bit. They're going to be going up against next week. They're going to be going up against a Roscommon team that are going to be fighting for survival, and they're going to be fighting for every point that they can get. They're going away to Roscommon as well, I think. So the fact that this Tyrone team go out of games, and particularly midfield, quite a lot, would concern me for that Tyrone team, particularly in the early rounds of the league. Now, we all know the quality of this Tyrone team. It's laced with the All-Ireland medals. They've got All-Stars, so we know the talent is there. They're probably the most developed panel in the McKenna Cup this year, probably outside of maybe Monaghan or Derry. They seem to be the most stable squad there. So I wouldn't be overly concerned yet as a Tyrone fan for the championship and for later in the year. Off the back of last season, if I was Brian Dooher and Fergal Logan, I'd be wanting to put a massive step, a massive thing down early in the year. I would be pushing to win the National League, build that that fear in Tyrone football, that fear of Tyrone football. The counties, even Kerry to this day, Tyrone live in Kerry minds rent free. I don't understand where a lot of it comes from, because a lot of the time when I've watched this Tyrone team and Tyrone teams in the past, under Mickey Hart as well, this big bad Tyrone team, there's been a lot of very soft Tyrone teams over the last 10 years. Yes, they don't help themselves when they go down to the national stage, but comparatively speaking to that Donegal and Monaghan team, they were the teak tough Ulster teams of the last decade. Hard and fair, and I think that's where a lot of Tyrone's maybe issues stemmed from. They weren't an overly hard, since the Conor Gormleys left and the Colin Kavanaghs left that team. Outside of, and maybe Matty Donnelly you could put in there as well. Outside of them 2 or 3 players, there wasn't really any. I suppose Paddy Hamsey. There's about 4 tough hard players there, and the rest were all a bit soft. And then that maybe spilled over, and that's where I think maybe the dirtiness and the cynicalness come out of, because they can't compete. They can't compete physically, so they have to try and compete somewhere else. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I probably will get a lot of hate for that comment, but there's a lot of a lot of very good things. The mentality of Tyrone's very good. When they smell it, that's why I said this Tyrone team's the enigma of enigmas when it comes to Gaelic football, because when they get that circle the wagons mentality, they're mentally a very tough team to play against. When fitness wise, physicality wise, and that when they feel it, when they're up for it, they are a tough team to play against. But they're a bit like the French army, the historical thing in the French army. When they're confident and whenever they have that bit between their teeth, they're a hard unit to stop. But when you get them on the back foot, they capitulate, and they lose. No, they just lose that bit. I think they'll be okay in Division One this year. I think they have enough strength and depth in their squad that they'll stay up. Where I think they'll be disappointed is I think they should be competing every year for the Division One title, and they don't. Um, Now I can understand the reason why they've sights on an Ulster title, and particularly this with the Super 8 years, and in this year as well with the Super 8 years, and now with the group stage in the All Ireland. If you've got sights on winning an All Ireland like this Tyrone team will have this year, if you've got three tough Ulster games and three tough league games in the Ulster Championship, and then you're only at the quarter-final stage, and you might even be only in a pre-quarter-final stage. That's a lot of football to try. Very it's very tough mentally, very tough physically. To keep you playing, having to try and time your peaking and stuff as well. So I get it, why maybe the early rounds of the league maybe, and I would maybe understand. That maybe might explain the drop off in some of the McKenna Cup games, because maybe they haven't got the same conditioning work that they will have done later on in the year. Who knows? I think this Tyrone team will have a say in this year's All Ireland. I think there's enough about that panel that they'll be thereabouts. I don't think any county that has ambitions on winning on All Ireland this year will want to meet Tyrone at any stage in this championship. Um, they have the ability on their day to put any team to the sword. We've seen that 2 years ago against Kerry in the semi-final. They just have that knack of on the day turning up. I do think when you turn this Tyrone team, or when you put them on the back foot, um, they do have it bred into them that they can just go a wee bit soft, go a wee bit whingy at the referee. They don't dig in like the great Donegal team in the early 2010s, or the great Tyrone team of the 2000s. When the going got tough, they dug in and they got better. When the going gets tough with this Tyrone team, sometimes they kind of roll over, looking their belly scratched a little bit. I hope to God they prove me wrong, because I do think they're the best bet in Ulster for an All Ireland this year, and I'd love to see Ulster back on top. Um, but we'll have to wait and see. Very impressed with Cathal McShane and Derek Hannivan's form up front. There's your little guy David Mulgrew, played well in parts as well, but went missing in the McKenna Cup final. Richie Donnelly had some good form early in the McKenna Cup, but again went missing and got hauled off towards the end of that first half. Now again, that could have been an injury related, we don't know. But again, his form wasn't good up until that point. Got on a lot of ball, but didn't. There was no cutting edge in that Tyrone team, particularly in that first half. They got their hands on a fairish amount of ball, but they never really they only kicked 1 point in the first half. I know they were probably kicking into the teeth. Judging off what happened in the second half as well. They were probably playing into a fairly strong win, but even still, Derry kicked multiple points in that second half. Tyrone struggled to break down the low block of Derry, which would be a concern, because teams probably will come to Omagh and around the country, and they will put up a low block against this Tyrone team, and can they break it down? Admittedly, Cathal McShane didn't start the game, Derek Hannivan didn't play the game, but I would have been worried about Matty Donnelly's form in the final. I'd have been worried about Richie Donnelly's form in the final. Kieran McGeary hasn't quite got up and running yet. Frank Burns hasn't had a good 18 months. Now, there's a lot of that. Nick Petey Hart still Mr. Consistency. I think their midfield's definitely competing a lot better this year than what they have done last year. I thought they were very disappointing around the middle third last year. Connor Myler, again, he is very quickly becoming the new Brian Dooher. They found a great young talent. He's not that young, but a great new talent in Cormac Monroe, the Carrickmore man. I think it's exactly what that Tyrone team need in the full back line. He is Conor Gormley 2.0. He's anytime you go down to Carrickmore, you expect a good tough. They breed them differently down there. They have that arrogance about them, that confidence about them, that toughness about them. Similar to the lads in the east of that county, Paddy Hamsey again, another teak tough. Again had a poor season last year. I don't think any of that Tyrone panel exactly covered themselves in glory last year. Darren McCurry was a bit anonymous in the final, but it was his first appearance, so maybe there's a bit of ring rust there. Took his goal well, to be fair to the lad. So again, very enigmatic, this Tyrone team. Played very well in parts. They played very well in parts against Cavan. Played very well. They seed out the game very well against Fermanagh. They played very well in the opening 35-40 minutes against Derry in the group game. They went completely out of the game in the last 20 minutes against Derry in the group, and outside of that opening 10-15 minutes of the second half, they weren't at the races in the McKenna Cup final. Again, we don't know what the workload, and with all these cases, particularly with Donegal, Monaghan, Tyrone, Cavan, we don't know the workloads in training this time of year. For all we know, Tyrone put in 2 heavy sessions that week before the Derry game, and that's why they just looked that little bit off the pace in the first half. Same with Cavan against Tyrone. Maybe they put a big week's training in and they just couldn't get to the pitch of the game. It's possible. This time of year, again, there was no challenge matches, no limited training before Christmas. So they could be doing a lot of very intense training to get ready for the start of the league. So that's why it's very, very hard to read into any of these performances. Nick Down could be maybe doing limited training during the week and really getting their preparation right for the games and looking very sharp in games. And then maybe when they get into the National League and other teams start preparing that way as well, maybe they might look a little bit off the pace because they haven't maybe done the same level of fitness work as some of the other bigger teams. Same with Armagh, same with Derry. I don't think that's the case with Derry. I do think they are just, they're at that different level of preparedness. And I think Derry and Tyrone, definitely nobody's going to want to play Derry or Tyrone this year in the championship. Same with Armagh. Armagh are going to be a real tough team. I think Down and Fermanagh are going to be our 2 dark horses from Ulster this year. And and hopefully Antrim, if we see a nice bit of progress from Antrim, nice wee bit of progress from Cavan as well, hopefully we'll have a very strong season from all of these teams, and I really hope that Tyrone can get to the latter stages of the championship this year. There's definitely a few commentators down south, that fella from Dublin Fan TV, GA Fan TV, he definitely reckons that there could be a few shocks in this Tyrone team this year as well. They could throw a few spanners in the work this year, which again I hope's true. I hope Derry, I hope Armagh, I hope Monaghan throw a few spanners in the works this year and knock out a few big scalps this year. So hopefully we have a good season. Recap on the final. My recap on the final. Firstly, with Tyrone, there's definitely a massive lack of cutting edge in that first half. When Derry put in the low block, they really struggled with that. They also struggled to compete, get on the fundamentals around the middle of the field. In that first half, Derry really bossed the game. They look sharper up front. They had a better cutting edge. They have more fight and hunger around the middle of the field. Defensively, their low block and their press out of the low block was just had, they just had that little bit more of an edge, more of an edginess, more of a combative streak. Tyrone were almost playing a little bit apologetic, a bit soft in that first half in particular. Benny Gallen, two fantastic saves from Benny Gallen, kept them in that match in the first half. Unfortunately, Benny Gallen hurt himself in the process of making the second of the two saves, and I hope to God the wee Cub's okay. Definitely did quite well in that first half. Start of the second half was definitely better for Tyrone. Cathal McShane coming in, Conor Myler coming in, Peter Hart coming in at the end of the first half definitely made a difference at the start of the second half. Derry adapted to that pretty well. By 15 minutes into the second half, they'd pretty much nullified Cathal McShane to the better part. Peter Hart struggled to make an influence after that as well, and they just caught Tyrone in the break. They just low block, stripped Tyrone, quick transition, bang, over the bar or in the net. All over, they kicked a lot of wides in the game, which is at times has been a bit of a problem with this Tyrone team. They just seem to kick a lot of wides. Some of their big players were not in the game. Matty Donnelly, Richard Donnelly were a bit poor. Even their midfielders, Brian Kennedy, Con Kilpatrick, who's done quite well in the start of the second half and has done quite well over the course of the McKenna Cup. There's a wee guy, is it Cairn? He did quite well too, but again, just were disappointing. The ease at which Derry cut through them in the second half as well would definitely be a concern if you're in the Tyrone camp. Far too easy, being caught on the break. And that was a bit of an issue last year at times as well. And then Derry, sharp in front of goal. They dominated the first half, which laid the foundation for the victory. They bossed midfield. They really bullied Tyrone a bit in that first half. They were very sharp in front of goal, particularly Shane McGuigan. Worried how they went totally out of the game at the start of the second half. They literally just took them away. But again, that's probably expected at this time of year. You're not going to dominate for a full match. They hung in there quite well, and the foundation they laid in the first half meant that when they got their purple patch towards the second half of the third quarter or the final quarter, they were able to kick for home. They looked very fit. They looked very mobile. They looked very sharp. They competed well overall in midfield, and that's even without Bradley and Conor Glass, which is to come back after their club final appearance. So they put Tyrone under big pressure all over the pitch. That was the one thing that really impressed me, particularly from the final. They really know how to put teams under pressure. They're bubbling well for the start of the league. They also need to guard against complacency and burnout. They're going very well this early in the season. We've seen it before, particularly with Monaghan in previous, where they've come out of the blocks well in the National League early in the season, early in Ulster. By the time they get to that quarter-final stage, you can just sort of see that little bit of, burnout and peaking too early. So I think this Derry team just need to guard against that a little bit, guard against the complacency a little bit, which usually Rory Gallagher teams don't really have much of an issue with. He's very good at keeping them grounded. So again, so far so good for Derry this season, and long may it continue. The more Ulster teams we have competing at the top, the better. So final summary. I know this has gone on quite long. It's an hour and a half video, so we'll try and wrap this up fairly quickly here. So summary from Anna: very good fundamentals to the game, some very strong new talents filtering into that team. I think there's definitely a few shocks in that Fermanagh team as well. Cavan, again, got to the pitch of the games quite well. Maybe lacked a little bit of the fundamentals of the game, like possession, primary ball. But again, their savviness, getting to the pitch of the game, the conditions, how the team they're playing, setting up defensively, how to work balls into the full forward line. Again, that was very impressive from this Cavan team. One thing maybe that might go against them later on in the year in the hot cut and trust of Championship football is maybe their strength and depth possibly might let them down. But again, there's good fundamentals. There's a good platform there for that Cavan team to maybe do something constructive this year. Down, I've already got quite giddy about Down earlier on in this video. They look up and at it. They've got good fundamentals on the pitch. They seem to be able to win their primary ball. They seem to be able to hold on to the ball quite well. And they were to the pitch of every game. They were unlucky not to make the final against Down or against Derry. In that Derry game in the semi-final, they were very unlucky, I thought. On a penalty shootout, and they probably should have hung out for that win. Maybe that's that little bit of experience at that level maybe worked against them a little bit. I do like what Conor Lavery's doing with that team. I do like what his background team are working towards. Definitely give me Gallagher vibes in Derry. So hopefully this Down team can push on and maybe get out of Division 3 and maybe have a good stab in the Championship and see how far they can get. Derry played very well. Their savviness got them over the line against Down. Again, their performance against Tyrone was extremely impressive. One thing possibly that might go against them is they maybe haven't developed the panel maybe as much as some of the other teams. Might work against them when they get to the ladder and deep into the Championship, particularly if they get deep into the All-Ireland series again. That's maybe one where I thought maybe they let themselves down last year. In those big games in Croke Park, other teams just were better off the bench than them. Tyrone seemed to be going well, seemed to be plodding along nicely. Some established names that had a poor season last year seem to be coming back. Richie Donnelly outside of the final seemed to be playing well, seemed to have his fitness back, seemed to have a bit of sharpness back. Cathal McShane, after a tough couple of years with injury, had a very poor season last year. Seems to be up and at it again this year. Dara Canavan seems to be going well. Petey Hart seems to be going well. Some of their other players, Con Kilpatrick, who had a very, very tough season last year. Brian Kennedy, who had a very tough season last year. They seem to be showing very early promise in the National League. Would be worried about them off the back of the McKenna Cup final. But again, there could be multiple reasons for that. Monaghan and Donegal, maybe more experimental squads. Maybe a slight concern for their early league form, potentially. But who knows? Monaghan in particular have made a career out of proving people wrong when it comes to judgments. So it's very hard to nail your colours to the mast in relation to this Monaghan team. Again, two teams in transition. They've dominated Ulster football in the 2010s. They've maybe slipped back into the pack a little bit more now, but they're still a big threat, both in League and Championship this year. There will be tough teams to come up against. Antrim look to have a nice wee nucleus forming. They look decent on the ball. When they got primary possession, they looked after it quite well. Their build-ups were nice and crisp, possibly a little bit slow. And their link into the final third will probably need a little bit more work. Will need a little bit of sharpening up. But again, they have a good nucleus of young players coming through. If they can keep them young players together, they should do well. And that is my summary of the McKenna Cup. That kind of went on a little bit longer than I was anticipating. But thank you very much for tuning in and listening in again. Next up, National League. Let's see how our Ulster teams will do in the National League. Thank you very much. If you like what you've heard, give us a like, give us a comment, give us a follow, and we'll see where we can take this channel. Thank you very much, and best of luck to all our boys in all competitions going forward.